Welcome to Module 3 of 11 modules of the Certificate 4 of Project Management course, presented by Charter Australia. Understanding and managing scope is the first and most important work to be done on a project. Defining scope enables the project manager to ensure that only the required work will be done, no more, no less. It is important that the project scope is agreed upon by the key stakeholders and approved by the project sponsor. Defining scope starts in the initiation or concept phase of the project and is built upon, reviewed and modified as the planning phase progresses. In the initiation phase, the concept paper will typically contain a high-level scope statement, which provides an outline of what is expected to be done in the project. The high-level scope and high-level cost and time estimates enable the project sponsor to make an informed decision as to whether to provide funding and approval for the project to move forward to the planning phase. Because the complexity of the project and the delivery options are often not uncovered until the planning stage, the project sponsor will often give approval for seed funding, which covers only the planning phase. At the end of the planning phase, the viability of the project will be re-evaluated together with a more detailed scope and more accurate estimates of time and cost. At this approval point, often called a stage gate, funding for the rest of the project will be approved if the project sponsor believes it should still go ahead. There are 5 key processes associated with scope management, and we will examine each one in detail in this module. Firstly, I will just provide an overview of each of the processes. The first process is the scope management plan. This is a section of the PMP, or Project Management Plan. The scope management plan describes how scope will be defined, controlled, reported, and assessed during the project. The second process, requirements definition, is the understanding and documentation of the customer's requirements for the project. Once the requirements are known, then it is possible to define the project scope. That is, what needs to be done to deliver the product or service to satisfy the customer's requirements. At this point, the customer must verify that the scope definition is really what he or she needs. Because we live in a changing world, we always know that there will be changes during the project. This is quite acceptable as long as there are not too many. However, change must be controlled in order to avoid huge overruns in cost and time, as well as ensuring that we are still delivering what the customer really wants. It is important that we define a process to manage project change and report on progress. Finally, at the end of the project, we need to assess how successful we actually were. Did we deliver what the customer wanted? Did we manage change successfully? Let us now look at the 5 scope processes in more detail. Firstly, the scope management plan will be a section in your PMP. The 3 most important topics it should contain are: firstly, how requirements will be gathered and documented. This will depend very much on the type of project you are working on. However, common methods of requirements gathering can include user interviews, business process analysis, and user workshops. Requirements may be documented in various ways, depending on your industry, but are commonly a list of the required functionality and attributes of the required product or service. The second important component of the scope management plan is a description of the procedures you will use to document and obtain approval for any changes to scope. This is called the change control process. We will discuss this in more detail a little later. Finally, you should plan how to review the success of scope management for the project and how to incorporate this into the post-implementation review. For many projects, particularly business and IT projects, the detailed requirements are not fully understood at the beginning of the project. Often the customer only has a concept of the outcome, but cannot clearly articulate it. This is why many project teams require the assistance of business analysts. Their role is to work with the business stakeholders to clearly enunciate the requirements, document them, and gain approval. The Dilbert cartoon on this slide is very typical of what can happen when a business analyst initially asks the business customer to describe their requirements. Failure to fully analyze, document, and verify the customer requirements can result in a lot of costly changes later on in the project, or in the worst case, can result in project cancellation. In construction and engineering projects, it is also important that initial requirements are understood so that the final design reflects the functionality and attributes desired by the customer. The scope statement is also usually included in the PMP, but may also be in other documents such as the business case or documents associated with tendering or quotations. The scope statement defines the project goal, which is a high-level statement of project purpose, for example, to build a swimming pool in the backyard. It must also itemize the key objectives. These are specific statements about what the project is aiming to achieve. Objectives are the benchmarks against which the project success will be measured. The project deliverables must also be defined. These are the products or services which will be produced as a result of undertaking the project. The scope statement then goes on to describe what work will be done in order to achieve the objectives and deliverables. A clear project objective should be simple and concise statements of what the project aims to achieve, together with measurement criteria. Types of measurement criteria may be, for example, specific due dates, both for the ultimate completion of the project and for intermediate milestones. Specific quality criteria that the deliverables must meet, or cost estimates that the project must not exceed. For objectives to be effective, all project stakeholders must officially agree to them. Whether or not these objectives are achieved will contribute to evaluating the ultimate success of the project. For example, when building a swimming pool, one objective may be to complete the pool by a specific date and within a specified budget. Another objective may be to have no more than a pre-agreed maximum number of defects at handover. These objectives could in turn result in penalty clauses being built into the contract. So, in summary, an objective must be SMARTer. That is, S, specific, that is clear and concise. M, measurable, able to be measured at the end of the project to determine success. A, achievable, must be realistic. Relevant, must support the strategic objectives of the organisation. Timely, there should be no doubt about when it will be achieved. And agreed, that is, approved by the stakeholders. A deliverable is the product or service or result that will be produced by the project. A deliverable is tangible as well as verifiable. To be verifiable, the deliverable must meet predetermined standards for its completion, such as design specifications for a product, like the new pool, or it may be a document like a user guide with predefined content. Deliverables may also be documents produced as a result of doing the project. For example, the PMP is also a project deliverable. It's important to differentiate between the two different types of deliverables in your scope statement. For the purpose of this course, we will consider only the final project deliverables, that is, the products or services which will be handed over to the customer. Examples of deliverables for a project to build a new swimming pool are the swimming pool itself, built to specification, pool cover, warranty documents, and maintenance manuals. The scope statement defines the project boundaries clearly and unambiguously. Listing what is in and out of scope gives you the opportunity to ensure that there is a very clear understanding between you and your stakeholders about what is included in the project and what isn't. For example, in your swimming pool project, you may wish to list a pool heater as being out of scope in order to ensure that your customer clearly understands that this is an optional extra. The benefits of a well-defined statement are providing a basis for defining work to be done and resources needed. Improved accuracy of project estimates because there is less likelihood that something has been forgotten. It enables review and verification and approval of scope by the stakeholders. And importantly, creates a baseline against which later changes can be defined and controlled. This slide shows an example of a simple scope statement. You will find other examples in your textbook on page 9 of Module 3. Being clear about what is in and out of scope can avoid later conflict with the customer and also additional costs in cases where the customer has a good case for assuming that certain items would be in scope. This is particularly important for a vendor who is delivering a product with a fixed price contract. In this case, the vendor would end up wearing the cost and will possibly make a loss on the project. We are now going to cover some other sections which you should include in your scope statement. The first one is project constraints. A constraint is something that will happen whether you like it or not. It will have a 100% chance of occurring unless something is done to change the situation. Examples of constraints may be a fixed budget or the number of resources available to you. For the swimming pool project, one constraint may be a 2-week shutdown over the Christmas period when no work will be done. Many project plans have failed due to constraints not being taken into account during the planning process. Project assumptions. As you define the scope of work, you will encounter unknowns for which you don't have answers. For example, you may assume that rock won't be encountered when the ground is excavated for the pool. This won't be known until excavation starts, but could add extra time and cost to the project. You may plan on the assumption that there will be no rock, but this must be documented. All assumptions require risk strategies to be associated with them. If rock is found, special equipment and additional time may be needed, adding to the cost of the project. Again, this may need to be built into the contract as an extra. Related projects. Related projects are those that will either have an impact on your project or will be impacted by it. This impact may have the potential to interfere with what you are doing, such as resource availability. On the other hand, it may be a matter of ensuring that there are no conflicting outcomes between multiple projects. You will also need to consider whether any related projects will impose risks upon your project. The important thing is to ensure that you are seeing the whole picture. In summary, in order to develop a scope statement, you must go through the following steps. Know who your stakeholders are. Define the project objectives and deliverables. Define what is in and out of scope. List all the constraints, assumptions, and related projects. And then ask the stakeholders to review, verify, and approve the scope. Scope creep. Uncontrolled scope creep must be avoided at all costs. It can occur when there is no change control process or the change control procedures are not strictly adhered to. Scope creep will inevitably result in increased cost and time. In most projects, some changes to scope are inevitable and often necessary. Uncontrolled changes or too many changes can result in a project getting out of control and never finishing. Uncontrolled changes can cause havoc with project finances, resource planning, scheduling, and quality of the deliverables. Controlled changes to projects can be positive. Sometimes change is forced upon a project due to external events such as changes to legislation or company changes to products or operating procedures. Changes can also be internal to the project due to inaccurate specifications or technology issues. The important thing is that these types of changes must be controlled through the application of predefined and improved change control procedures, which are applied against the originally defined scope and specifications. This is also called a baseline. Scope change also has a human impact. Our little Dilbert cartoon illustrates the effect that too many scope changes can have on team member morale. It can also result in lower productivity. We are now going to work through the basic steps in the change control process. How each step is implemented may differ between organizations. Some may have a manual process, and other organizations use an automated system to log and track changes. In the construction and engineering industries, project changes are usually called variations. Requests for change must be documented and sent to the project manager or authorized representative. It is important that only one person on the project is responsible for the change control process, and this must be the project manager. Upon receipt, the request for change must be logged in a register with a change request number, the date it was received, details of who raised the change request, and what the change request is and why it is required. The change control register must be kept updated with the current status of the change as it goes through the assessment and approval cycle. Secondly, define the change and the solution. The need for the change and the proposed solution must be clearly articulated. It is important that the impact of not doing the change also be considered. It's amazing how many unimportant change requests are withdrawn when the need must be justified. The third step is impact assessment. Impact assessment is a very important step in the change control process. It often takes quite a lot of time to assess the impact of a change on the project in terms of time, cost, quality, resources, and risk. It is important to allow contingency time on large projects to do this work. Normally, the cost of implementing a change will increase as you move through the project life cycle. In the planning phase, only planning documentation may need to change, but during the execution and control phase, costly rework may be required. Next, the change must be accepted or rejected. Once the impact assessment is completed, the project sponsor and key stakeholders must formally accept or reject the change. This result must then be updated in the change control register and communicated to the project team and all stakeholders. The key documentation such as budget, schedule, risk register and any other technical documentation must also be updated and communicated. A sample change request template is included in the template library on Chase Online. The processes for scope management are developed during the planning phase of the project and are maintained right up to the project closure phase. As with other elements of project management, how the scope was managed and reported must be reviewed and included in the final post-implementation review report. The following questions are a guide as to what should be addressed during the scope management review. Did you achieve your objective? That is, the measurements that you specified. Did you deliver everything you committed to? Did you have scope creep? What lessons can be learnt about scope management? Can we do anything better? Which tools and techniques have you used? Were they useful? And what did you learn? And finally, how will you transfer your lessons learnt to others? This ends Module 3, Scope Management. You now need to complete the following scope assignments for your case study project and submit them to your tutor: the scope statement and the change control.